Welcome to the Art of Lighting for Film. These are the topics we will cover to help you understand how light is created and controlled to illuminate motion picture scenes, and how the proper exposure captures the look of these scenes on film. If this is the first time you are taking this course, we recommend you begin by clicking on the Using This Course button. If you are familiar with the interface and know how to navigate through the program, make any selection of your choice. At the completion of this topic, you'll be able to describe the difference between natural lighting and pictorial lighting, identify the difference between hard light and soft light sources, and position basic light sources. Lighting shapes the reality in front of the lens, giving it depth or flatness, excitement or boredom, reality or artificiality. Light can fall on the scene in a variety of ways to create many different moods to help tell the story. From an artistic standpoint, the cinematographer, also known as the director of photography, needs to consider how light falls on and around the actors, how colors bounce off objects and reflect onto faces. He or she must also be aware of the location of highlights and shadows. Lighting styles are influenced by the needs of the director and story, the budget, the experience and artistic vision of the cinematographer, lenses and lighting equipment, as well as the technical progress in film stocks. There are two basic philosophies of lighting. Naturalism follows the logical positioning of light sources in a scene. This is often referred to as motivated lighting. Pictorialism allows the use of light angles that violate this logic if they achieve a more pleasing picture as a result. Click on each word to see the difference. With the naturalism approach, when you photograph two people facing each other in an exterior daylight scene, if one person is in backlight, the other person must be in full sunlight. With the pictorialism approach, both people might have backlight because it looks better, though it's not realistic. To establish the desired look, the cinematographer can use two general but not mutually exclusive techniques: motivated lighting and lighting planes. Motivated lighting requires a logical light source. A cinematographer may ask the question, where's the light coming from, and can I justify this light source? A key to natural lighting is understanding and mimicking how light reflects off of surfaces and how it bounces around a location. The technique of lighting a plane takes into consideration how and where different planes of a three-dimensional subject, room, or location receive the light to give the perception of depth. A source of light can be hard, soft, or somewhere in between, depending on the type of shadows it creates. Click on each light source to see the difference. Light that travels directly from the bulb to the subject will usually cause sharply defined, deep shadows. In general, hard light creates more drama, texture, and can be easily shaped. Hard light is from a small source relative to the subject. If the light is bounced off a diffuse reflecting surface, or if it is diffused by some translucent substance between the light and the subject, the shadows will be weaker and less sharp. Soft light is more flattering to subjects of all ages, is more romantic, and envelops the subject. However, it is a challenge to control unwanted spill light on walls and other surfaces. Soft light comes from a large source relative to the subject. The direction from which the light comes suggests the mood of the scene, the time of day, and the type of location. It also models the objects in the scene, bringing out their shape and texture, or perhaps intentionally obscuring shape and texture. To see how each of these basic lights illuminates the scene, click on each. The key light is the dominant source of light and is often positioned before others are set. It usually establishes character and mood of the shot. The fill light lightens the shadow areas, enabling film to see more like the eye. Fill light gives the appearance of ambient light and determines the mood by keeping shadows dark or by lightening them. Often the fill light is a large, soft source that creates no objectionable shadows. Bounce boards can also be used opposite the key light to reflect light back onto the shadow side of the subject. The background light accentuates the areas behind the subject, while creating separation from the foreground subject. The backlight illuminates the subject from behind, relative to camera position. Its source may be placed directly behind or slightly off to one side of the subject. This is how the scene looks with all the lights in position. We will cover the positioning of lights in greater detail later in this course. A variety of specialty lights can also be used to further enhance the look of the scene. Click on each to see the difference it makes. The top light is positioned high and over the subject, creating a sinister look. The eye light is used to bring the actor's eyes alive by creating a reflection of the light in the eye. Often placed near the lens axis, this is usually a well-diffused or weak source. The accent light is used to distinguish some part of the set, an important prop, or the background from its surroundings. This is how the scene looks with all the lights in position. A wide range of light sources can illuminate a scene. Each light source has a color temperature, which determines the type of film and filters, if any, that should be used when filming. When a film is manufactured, it is balanced for use with a specified color temperature of light. Color temperature, expressed in degrees Kelvin, refers to the proportions of wavelengths that a light source radiates. To compensate for different light sources, color emulsions are formulated so that film exposed under the specified light source reproduces colors the way we expect them to look. Since it's impractical to supply special types of films balanced for every lighting condition, films have been developed for use with the most common light sources, daylight and tungsten. Daylight film is designed for use in situations where the primary source of illumination is skylight, daylight, or HMI lights, which approximate daylight. Tungsten film is designed to be used under the warm cast of tungsten lights. The sensitivities of its emulsion layers are adjusted so that the film is less sensitive to the overly abundant yellow, orange, and red light, and more sensitive to the proportionally small amount of blue light that tungsten lights produce. This image has normal color balance because it was captured on daylight film using a daylight source. To see what happens when daylight film is exposed to the wrong light, click on the tungsten and the fluorescent light. This image has normal color balance because it was captured on tungsten film using a tungsten light source. To see what happens when it is exposed to the wrong light, click on daylight and the fluorescent light. When filming under light sources different from those recommended on the film, we can place a filter over the camera lens or the light source to change the color balance of the light reaching the film. Each filter has a specified set of transmission characteristics, passing certain wavelengths while blocking others. The film datasheet contains the starting point filter recommendations for the most common light sources, but an on-site test should be made and processed. For color reversal films, color balance is more critical, so filters are used to make even small shifts in color when shooting the film. Color negative films are made into positive prints or transferred to video. Color changes can be made by a color timer during the printing phase or by a telecine colorist in a post-production facility. Filters may also be used to create various special effects. To see the difference, click on the name of each filter. A warming filter can make a scene more yellow to simulate late afternoon. A soft focus filter can give the illusion of another time or to soften blemishes on skin. Color grad filters are clear on one half and tinted on the other half, so that only part of a scene is affected, such as the color of the sky. Filters can also be used to color scenes in ways that never occur in the real world. Color bursts, stars, and otherworldly effects. At the completion of this topic, you'll be able to identify principal light sources, describe how accessories control light, describe how to control light by positioning, and relate lighting ratio to low-key shots and high-key shots. The crew responsible for lighting during motion picture filming is headed by the gaffer, or chief lighting technician, who reports to the director of photography. The best boy assists the gaffer by ordering the lighting equipment and overseeing the lighting crew. Lighting technicians install, operate, and maintain lighting. They retrieve the light which the gaffer asks for, put it in position, raise or lower it, and wait for orders from the gaffer to turn it on or off. If necessary, they add diffusing material in front of the light or they adjust the width of the light beam by opening or closing the light's barn doors. These are the principal types of light sources that can be used by the lighting crew to achieve the look of the scene. First, let's clarify a few of these terms. Tungsten, HMI, and fluorescent refer to types of lamps. Open face and Fresnel refer to types of fixtures that hold the lamps. PAR lights are very efficient because they use parabolic reflectors. Now click on the name of each light to learn more. Open-face tungsten lights are quartz halogen units that do not have a lens. They are brighter but harder to control than units with lenses. Open-face tungsten lights are used primarily for bouncing and thorough diffusion. Tungsten Fresnel spotlights are incandescent lights containing a stationary Fresnel lens. The bulb and hemispherical reflector can be moved farther from the Fresnel lens to a narrow beam for the spot position, or closer to the lens for the flood position, which illuminates a wider area. These spotlights range from 100 watts to 20 kilowatts. Tungsten PAR lights are incandescent lights containing a parabolic reflector. These lights are often used in banks of 6 to 24 units, but can be used individually. Small HMI Fresnels of 200 to 1200 watts are used as interior direct light or bounce light when daylight color balance is needed. 12 to 18 kilowatt HMI Fresnels have replaced the carbon arc lights as the workhorse large light. HMI PAR lights are a highly efficient source of daylight balanced light of 5600 degrees K. Since HMIs operate at cooler temperatures than the comparable wattage in tungsten units, they're more comfortable for the talent. Soft lights are open reflector lights that produce soft light with gradual shadows. Indirect light is bounced off a diffuse white surface. These are generally tungsten lights. Kino Flo lights are fluorescent lighting systems for film production work. They operate on high-frequency ballast, which eliminates flicker problems. They are light and easy to rig. Ellipsoidal reflector spotlights provide a long, controllable throw that can light a stage from distant positions. They're often used in theatrical lighting. Before HMI lights were developed, and when films were slow, carbon arc lights provided the large amount of light needed. They're used today only when the unique quality of their light is needed, for example, to simulate hard sunlight. A practical lamp is any lamp actually photographed in the scene. Two additional types of lighting special applications are underwater lights and Musco lights. Underwater lighting systems are sealed, watertight units that include a sensing device and shutdown mechanism in case of electrical faults. They must also be able to withstand the thermal stress on the glass that comes into contact with water. Musco lights are truck-mounted boom arms with banks of high-efficiency, open-face HMI fixtures. They're used to light very large expanses. There are many accessories which the lighting crew can use to control light creatively. Click on each to learn more about them. Using a diffusion material in front of the light source can make the light softer. Generally, the denser the diffusion, the greater the light scattering properties. Reflector board is positioned to bounce light where it is needed. Foam core is a type of reflector board. Scrims, usually made of metal mesh, can be used between the light and the subject to reduce the intensity of the light. A single scrim cuts the light by half a stop. A double cuts light by a full stop. Barn doors on the light sources control the pattern of the light. They can be used to prevent unwanted shadows or to create shadows where we want them. They offer greater control in the flood position of the lighting unit. Flags, dots, and cookies in a variety of shapes and sizes are used to create shadow patterns. Gelatin filters, or gels, are mounted in front of lights and are used to adjust color. For example, orange CTO gels warm up daylight-balanced sources. The key to mood and character lighting is the angle of the main light. Changing the position of this light provides many creative options. Conventional key is usually 30 to 45 degrees to the side and above the subject. Click on each key light variation to see the difference. Low-angle key light from below the chin can give the mysterious Frankenstein look. Or if a soft source is used, it can create a very beautiful, sensual appearance. Sidelight key, at 90 degrees, lights the subject from only one side to create stark and dramatic effects. This is sometimes known as hatchet light because of its stark quality. Side light can also be soft and very natural looking. High-angle key, or top light, can be dreary or moody when the subject looks downward, or spiritual when the subject looks upward. Far side key, or Rembrandt lighting, has the main light set to the far side of the subject's nose, beyond the far eye. This leaves the rest of the face in shadow. Ear side key, or broad lighting, has the key from the camera side of the face, the ear side, leaving the front of the face in partial shadow. Backlight key can seem mysterious, otherworldly, romantic, or threatening. A high angle and frontal direction of the key light creates a characteristic butterfly shadow under the subject's nose. This style minimizes wrinkles, double chins, and large noses while emphasizing cheekbones. This is typical Hollywood glamour lighting. Changing the position of the backlight also provides creative options. As you'll recall, the main purpose of any type of backlighting is to create separation between the main subject and the background. Click on each position to see more. True backlight is positioned directly behind the subject, giving an edge of light on top and both sides of the subject's head. Rim lighting is positioned behind the subject and slightly to the left or right. This provides a thin rim of light to the subject on one side of the face. Kicker lighting creates a sheen on the cheek as seen from the camera angle. It is sometimes used on the dark side of the face instead of fill light. Liner lighting is basically a kicker, but forward enough so that it does not create any sheen. Glow lighting comes more from the side and creates a little glow on the shadow side of the face. This doesn't produce much of a shadow. It has no highlight or kick to it. Two major styles of lighting are high-key lighting and low-key lighting. High-key lighting has a predominantly bright feeling overall, with very few black areas or shadows within the scene. This kind of lighting features strong, even illumination on the subject and background, with bright highlights. Low-key lighting enhances depth by using contrasting tones of highlights and shadow. Only a few areas are well lit. There are many deep shadows. The ratio of dark shadow area to adequately lit areas creates the low-key effect. Here are a few more creative ways to control light for film. Click on each to learn more. Window light can be created with large areas of diffused light or light bounced into foam core or beadboard. Lighting is soft but directional and is clearly justified or motivated by the light coming from a window. None of the values are extremely bright or dark. Back cross key lighting is an effective way of lighting two people with two lights rather than four lights. Each light serves a dual purpose, as a back key light for one actor and as the backlight for the other actor. One broad bounced fill can work for both subjects. Checkerboard lighting directs the light on the subject and background in a way that creates alternating light and dark areas. Godfather lighting uses overhead soft lights called chicken coops or coffin lights. This type of lighting puts the eyes into deep shadow. To create lighting contrast on a subject, the ratio of the intensity of the key light to the fill light can be varied. This is called the lighting ratio. The fill light is always the 1 in the ratio. Conventionally, lighting ratios are applied to relatively small areas, primarily people. However, to maintain lighting continuity, it can be helpful to express the mood of the shot or sequence in terms of a lighting ratio. A low-key shot has a higher ratio of key to fill than a high-key shot. For example, in a nighttime shot, the fill light level could be at least 2 stops darker than the key light. With a higher ratio, the lighting shows greater contrast. By comparison, in a high-key shot, the fill light level is much closer to the key light level, which produces a flatter, lower contrast look. To determine the lighting ratio, a light meter reading is taken from the key light side of the subject. The light on the key side can be made up of the key light with some overlap from the fill light. This reading is compared to the fill light reading alone. Thus, the ratio is expressed as key plus fill to fill. If the fill light does not wrap around to the key light side, the ratio would be referred to as key to fill. This chart is an example of the relationship between the lighting ratios, camera stops, and T-stop readings. At the completion of this topic, You'll be able to identify the key, back, and fill lights for a low-key scene, a high-key scene, and a mixed light scene. As we learned earlier, low-key lighting enhances depth by using contrasting tones of highlights and shadow. Only a few areas are well lit. There are many deep shadows. It is the ratio of dark shadow area to adequately lit areas that creates a low-key effect. High-key lighting has a predominantly bright feeling overall, with very few black areas or shadows within the scene. This kind of lighting features strong, even illumination on the subject and background, with bright highlights. Can you identify the type of lighting in these scenes? Drag the words low-key and high-key to the proper scene. This low-key scene was shot at night, with HMI light coming through the train windows and some tungsten in the background. This high-key scene was shot with the face of the woman as the flesh reference. The feeling is somewhat high-key around the bed. Hot, overexposed light is hitting the white bed covers, which show just a bit of detail. Let's take a closer look at the lighting diagram for this scene to see how the light sources were positioned. Since the lighting is different on the woman than on the man at the back of the car, we will take this scene in 2 steps. First, identify the key fill and backlights on the woman at the front of the car by clicking on the words. Now identify the key fill and backlights on the man at the back of the car by clicking on the words. Here's how this low-key scene looks with all the lights in place. Now let's see how the light sources were positioned in this high-key scene. As before, we will take this scene in 2 steps. First, identify the key, fill, and backlights on the woman and patient in the foreground by clicking on the words. Now identify the key, fill, and backlights on the hospital bed in the background. Here's how this high-key scene looks with all the lights in place. Now let's see how the lighting crew met the challenge of this scene shot in mixed light. In this scene, the feeling is of afternoon sun pouring through windows off camera to the left. This light is hot and somewhat burned out on the actor's clothes. She also has some fluorescent light hitting her from the desk lamp and a fluorescent tube hidden from view. Identify the key, fill, and backlights on this mixed light scene by clicking on the words. Here's how this mixed light scene looks with all the lights in place. Identify the results of overexposure and underexposure. Explain how to use light meters to determine normal exposure. Describe how the Gray Card Plus is used in various lighting conditions. And explain how to adjust exposure when filters are used on the camera lens. A prime goal of cinematographers is to maintain the best latitude, grain, color, and sharpness from their film stock. A properly exposed negative optimizes all of these characteristics. Consistent exposure minimizes dependence on the laboratory to fix problems, which always results in a trade-off in some area of image quality. Occasionally, cinematographers will deviate from the normal exposure. Based on the look they are trying to achieve, they may choose to overexpose or underexpose the stock. Click on each to learn more. When corrected to a normal image, overexposure results in less apparent grain, more saturated colors, richer, blacker blacks, and increased contrast. Underexposure, when corrected, results in more apparent grain, less saturated colors, smoky blacks, lower contrast, and less sharpness. Ansel Adams, a prominent American photographer, preferred to use the terms increased or decreased exposure when referring to an intentional change from normal exposure. Incident light meters and spot meters can give reliable, consistent results. Incident light meters are designed to measure light falling onto the subject. Spot meters measure light reflected from the subject and have a very narrow angle of acceptance. Incident meters provide the correct T-stop when held in the subject lighting. Manufacturers often recommend pointing the white dome of their meters toward the camera. Contrary to this advice, some notable cinematographers measure by pointing toward the main light source. They feel that this method provides more shot-to-shot consistency. When setting up an exposure meter, it is important to input the correct variables in order to obtain an optimal exposure. First, enter the exposure index for the film you are using, printed on the film can. Next, enter the frame rate, which determines exposure time per frame. Most cinemeters are set up for a 180-degree shutter, and calculations are based on this assumption. It is also important to compensate for a deviation from the 180-degree shutter angle and for any filters placed in front of the lens. For example, using a shutter angle of 90 degrees requires a one-stop exposure compensation. Therefore, a film with an exposure index of 250 is entered as 125 in order to compensate for this shutter angle. Since spot meters use an optical system, the accuracy of the spot indicator needs to be checked by reading a small bright area, such as a light bulb in the distance. The indicator should not move until the spot contacts the bright surface. Spot meters should also be checked for flare by reading a small dark surface surrounded by light surfaces. First, a reading is taken from a distance, then from close up to fill the entire viewing area. If the reading is significantly lower at the close distance, flare should be suspected. A cardboard tube can be used to shield the lens and reduce the chance of optical flare. 18% reflectance represents an average of all the reflectance values in a given scene. It can be thought of as a reflected value that falls halfway between a white object and a black object. Photographers and cinematographers sometimes meter an 18% gray to determine the proper exposure for a subject. The gray card serves as a reference for the cinematographer when viewing the dailies. Using a gray card minimizes guesswork and helps to ensure more accurate color reproduction. The Gray Card Plus chart is crucial to this communication process. The Gray Card Plus helps the colorist and film color timer preserve the look the cinematographer captured on film, and provides a neutral reference for exposure and color balance in telecine transfer setup. It is recommended that the Gray Card Plus be used in subject lighting, at the head of each roll, and every time there is a major lighting change. The card is positioned so it receives the same light intensity and color balance as the main subject, and occupies at least 15% of the frame. Shooting the Gray Card Plus shot with separate light may be necessary when placing the card in the scene will not provide an accurate exposure reference, for example in scenes that are cross-lit or mainly from a backlight. The card is placed in a C-stand or held steady near the camera. The card is lit with the same color temperature as the scene lighting. The Gray Card Plus can be used when the lighting doesn't match the color balance of the film. For example, when shooting under fluorescent lighting or warm household incandescent lights without correction filters. The card receives the same light color and intensity as the scene to be shot. When the shot with the card is graded to a neutral gray, the scenes following will be corrected to a more natural-looking color balance. When using the Gray Card Plus in scenes where lighting consists of different color temperatures, such as a combination of daylight, fluorescent, or tungsten, we have two options. The first approach reads the color temperature of the various areas of the scene, then determines the color temperature of the area which is visually dominant or most important. The card is then shot in this area to provide a reference for the color correction needed in the transfer or print. The second approach determines the average color temperature for the scene. Then the card is lit for this color temperature using a separate light. When the shot of the card is graded to a neutral gray, the scenes following will be corrected for a warmer or cooler color balance as determined by the light on the card. The Gray Card Plus is also used when a scene is to be graded or printed lighter or darker for an effect. For example, shooting day for night scenes at normal exposure, then printing or grading to look like dusk or night. The scene is shot at normal exposure to provide a full-range negative. To darken the scene, the card is overexposed. To lighten the scene, the card is underexposed. The amount the card is over or underexposed provides a grading reference for the way the scene is to be transferred or printed. One final consideration is to make sure that proper exposure compensation is made for each filter placed on the camera lens. Since the filter absorbs part of the light that would fall onto the film, the exposure must be increased. usually by using a larger aperture. Filtration is based on the light source and the film type. The film datasheet with Kodak motion picture films notes exposure compensation for commonly used filters by changing the exposure index. This chart shows how you'd change the exposure meter setting when shooting under different light sources and with the suggested filters. For example, using a tungsten film with an exposure index of 500, you would set the exposure meter to 500 when shooting under tungsten 3200K lighting. When shooting under daylight and using a number 85 filter, you would set the meter at 320. An 85 filter requires an exposure compensation of 2/3 stop.